Imagine holding a cutting tool over a car worth $6 million, knowing that one wrong move could ruin a panel that can never be replaced, because the company that built it refuses to sell you another one. That is exactly the moment Mat Armstrong faced with a crashed Bugatti Chiron per Sport, one only 60 ever made in the entire world. This was not a scratch bumper or a dented door that could be swapped out with a spare part from a warehouse. This was an original carbon fiber panel, perfectly good, never damaged, sitting on a car so rare that Bugatti itself had already turned its back on it after the crash. And yet, to build something nobody had ever built before, that panel had to be cut. Not patched, not repaired, cut permanently, with no way to undo the decision once the blade touched the surface. This single moment, a mechanic pausing with a cutting tool in his hand above an irreplaceable piece of one of the most expensive cars on the planet, captures everything that makes this story so gripping. It is a story about turning a wrecked supercar that its own manufacturer refused to support into the first wide-body Bugatti Chiron ever created, using a custom-built kit that traveled all the way from Dubai, arriving not by truck or by courier, but by helicopter, landing right in the backyard where the car was waiting. Along the way, this project involved a mysterious contact somewhere in Europe, a private jet trip lasting barely an hour, genuine Bugatti headlights that normally cost tens of thousands of dollars each, and a strange electrical fault that took months to figure out, eventually solved by a $15 part pulled from a completely different vehicle. This article will walk through the entire journey, step by step, using simple and easy language, so that anyone, whether they know anything about cars or not, can understand exactly what happened, why each decision mattered so much, and why the finished result is something Bugatti, with all of its rules, restrictions, and refusals, could never have built on its own. It is a story about risk, patience, cleverness, and the kind of bold thinking that only happens when someone is willing to make a cut they can never take back. What makes this story stand apart from most car videos is that nothing about it was guaranteed to work. There was no factory blueprint to follow, no official instructions from Bugatti explaining how to widen a Chiron, and no safety net if any single step went wrong. Every decision, from the smallest electrical fix to the largest structural cut, carried real financial and mechanical risk. And every single one of those decisions had to be made by two people working largely on their own, far away from any official support network. That is part of what makes the eventual result so impressive. It was built entirely through creativity, trial and error, unofficial contacts, and a willingness to keep pushing forward even when the easier and safer choice would have been to simply stop and leave the car in its original, unmodified condition. Instead, Mat Armstrong and Alex chose a harder path, the one filled with uncertainty, and ended up creating something that had never existed anywhere in the world before. Every stage of this journey, from a stubborn dashboard warning light to a helicopter landing in a backyard, adds another layer to a story that feels less like a simple repair video and more like a real-life adventure involving one of the rarest cars ever built. To understand why this project felt so dramatic, it helps to know the full backstory of the car itself. The Bugatti Chiron per Sport at the center of this story is not just any Chiron. It belongs to a very small group, with only 60 examples built in total, making it one of the rarest performance cars ever produced by the company. At some point before this project began, the car was involved in a serious crash, the kind of accident that would leave most vehicles completely written off and forgotten. But instead of disappearing into a scrapyard, this particular Chiron ended up in the hands of its owner, a man named Alex, and a mechanic known for taking on projects that most people would consider impossible, Mat Armstrong. What makes this situation even more interesting is that Bugatti itself refused to support the repair. This is an important detail, because it shows just how difficult and unusual this entire project really was from the very beginning. Bugatti is a manufacturer that closely controls almost every part of its cars, deciding who can buy replacement parts, who can access official repair information, and who is allowed to work on their vehicles in an official capacity, a level of control that protects the brand's reputation, but also leaves very few options open once a car falls outside that protective circle. When a manufacturer like that decides to step away from a car, it leaves the owner and the mechanic completely on their own, with no factory support, no official parts pipeline, and no guarantee that anything needed for the repair will even be available to buy. This meant that every single part used in this rebuild, from small electrical components to enormous carbon fiber body panels, had to be sourced through unusual channels, unofficial contacts, or clever workarounds discovered through trial and error. Rebuilding a car like this without any help from the manufacturer is already an enormous challenge on its own. But this project went far beyond simply repairing the car back to its original condition. Instead of trying to return the Chiron to exactly how it looked before the crash, Matt and Alex decided to use this rare opportunity to build something that had never existed before in the world, a fully wide-body version of the Bugatti Chiron, a transformation so extreme and so unofficial that Bugatti would almost certainly never have approved it, even if they had been willing to help with the repair in the first place. This decision set the stage for one of the most ambitious independent car projects the automotive world had seen in a long time. It is worth pausing here to think about how unusual the situation really is within the wider car world. Most supercar owners, even those with significant wealth, rely heavily on their manufacturer for support, parts, and guidance, especially when something goes wrong with a vehicle this rare and this complicated. Losing that support entirely, as Alex did after the crash, would normally leave an owner with very few options beyond selling the car for parts or leaving it sitting untouched for years. Choosing instead to rebuild the car from nothing, without any official help, and then pushing even further by turning it into a completely new kind of vehicle, shows a level of determination that goes far beyond simply wanting a car back on the road. It reflects a genuine desire to create something meaningful out of a situation that most people would have viewed as a total loss. This mindset, turning a rejected, unsupported wreck into the foundation for something entirely new, became the driving force behind every decision made throughout the rest of this project, shaping the tone of everything that followed. It also explains why so many people online became so invested in watching this build unfold, since it represented something rare in the world of expensive cars, a story about defiance and creativity, rather than simply about spending large amounts of money. Before any of the exciting bodywork could even begin, Matt still had a frustrating and confusing problem sitting right on the dashboard of the car, a persistent airbag warning light that simply would not turn off. This particular warning was linked to something called a battery interruption igniter fault, caused by a component known as a pyrofuse connected to the car's main battery. In simple terms, this pyrofuse is a safety device built to instantly disconnect power to the battery in the event of a crash, protecting the car and anyone inside it from serious electrical danger. Because the Chiron had already been in a real accident, it made sense that this safety system may have triggered, and Matt's first assumption was that the fuse itself needed to be replaced. He went ahead and installed a new fuse, expecting the warning light to disappear immediately afterward, but it did not. Despite replacing the part that seemed like the obvious cause, the airbag warning stayed exactly where it was, glowing on the dashboard as if nothing had changed at all. This kind of situation is incredibly frustrating for anyone working on a car because it means the problem is not what appears to be on the surface, and it forces a mechanic to dig much deeper into the electrical system to figure out what is actually going wrong. After spending a significant amount of time investigating further, Matt eventually discovered that the real cause of the fault had nothing to do with the fuse at all. The actual problem was an extremely small piece of orange plastic located inside the electrical connector attached to the fuse. This small plastic piece contained two tiny locking tabs, and at some point both of these tabs had broken off completely, without those tabs holding everything securely in place. The electrical pins inside the connector were able to touch each other in a way they were never supposed to, creating a resistance fault that the car's computer system interpreted as a serious problem, triggering the warning light again and again, no matter how many new fuses were installed. This tiny, almost invisible piece of broken plastic had been causing an enormous amount of confusion, wasted time, and wasted effort, all because it was so small and so easy to overlook compared to the larger, more obvious fuse sitting right next to it. Once Matt finally understood the true cause of the problem, the solution turned out to be far simpler and far cheaper than anyone would have expected after such a long and frustrating search. This part of the story is a good reminder of just how much patience and careful thinking is required when working on a car this complicated. A less experienced mechanic might have assumed the fuse replacement had simply failed, or worse, might have suspected a much larger and more expensive electrical problem somewhere deeper inside the car's wiring system. Chasing that kind of assumption could easily have led to hours of unnecessary work, expensive diagnostic equipment, or even the replacement of costly components that were never actually broken in the first place. Instead, By continuing to investigate carefully rather than accepting the first obvious explanation, Matt avoided what could become an extremely expensive and time-consuming mistake. This willingness to keep digging, even after replacing what seemed like the obvious faulty part, ended up saving an enormous amount of money and effort, and it set a useful example for how problems on rare, unsupported vehicles often need to be approached, not with assumptions, but with careful, patient investigation. Once Matt figured out that the real problem was a tiny broken orange plastic piece inside the connector rather than the fuse itself, he needed to find a way to replace it without damaging the surrounding parts, which was not an easy task given how small and fragile the component actually was. Instead of trying to track down an official Bugatti replacement part, which likely would have been expensive, difficult to find, or simply unavailable given the manufacturer's refusal to support the car, Matt came up with a much more creative and affordable solution. He discovered that a nearly identical fuse and connector setup could be found in a completely unrelated vehicle, a Mercedes Vito van, a common commercial van used by countless businesses and drivers around the world, with absolutely no connection to Bugatti or high-performance supercars whatsoever. Matt purchased this replacement fuse from the Mercedes Vito van for a remarkably small amount of money. Just $15, an almost laughably tiny figure when compared to the $6 million car it was about to help repair. With the new part in hand, Matt carefully and patiently removed the small orange locking tab from the Mercedes fuse assembly, taking great care not to damage in the process, since the entire fix depended on this tiny piece being transferred successfully. He then carefully placed this small orange tab into the original Bugatti connector, restoring the locking mechanism that had been missing for so long. Once everything was reassembled and plugged back into place, the result was immediate and completely satisfying. The dashboard cleared instantly, with no warning lights and no fault messages remaining anywhere on the display. For the very first time since the crash had happened, the Bugatti Chiron finally had a completely clean and normal dashboard, free of any confusing or worrying alerts. Matt himself described just how much effort had gone into solving what turned out to be such a tiny problem, explaining that he and another person, Toby, had spent considerable time searching all around Miami trying to find the right power fuses, only to discover that the actual solution had nothing to do with fuses at all, and everything to do with one small piece of broken plastic. This entire chapter of the story serves as a perfect example of something that seems to happen again and again with extremely expensive and complicated machines. Months of confusion, searching, and frustration were ultimately resolved not by an expensive official part, but by a $15 component borrowed from an ordinary delivery van, combined with patience, careful observation, and a willingness to look past the obvious explanation to find the real cause hiding underneath. This moment also says something important about how supercar repair culture is slowly changing. For a long time, owning a rare car like a Bugatti meant accepting that every single repair would need to go through official channels, using official parts, at official prices, no matter how small or simple the actual problem turned out to be. This story shows a different path, one where clever, resourceful mechanics look beyond brand names and official parts catalogs, searching instead for practical solutions that solve the exact same problem for a tiny fraction of the cost. A $15 part from a delivery van fixing a fault on a $6 million hypercar sounds almost unbelievable, yet worked perfectly, proving that the value of a fix has very little to do with the price tag attached to it, and everything to do with correctly identifying the real cause of the problem in the first place. It is the kind of detail that sticks with viewers long after they finish watching, precisely because it flips the usual expectation of supercar ownership on its head, showing that expensive does not always mean complicated, and rare does not always mean impossible to fix. With the electrical problems finally solved and the dashboard completely clear, attention shifted to the part of this project that everyone involved had truly been waiting for, the arrival of the custom wide-body kit designed specifically for this Bugatti Chiron. This was not an ordinary aftermarket part that could simply be ordered from a catalog and shipped through normal delivery services. This kit, created by a company called Venuum, was valued at over $700,000, and it represented something that had never existed anywhere in the world before this project began. Because there was no existing wide-body Chiron anywhere to use as a reference or a template, every single panel included in this kit had to be designed completely from scratch, based purely on digital renders and careful planning between Matt, Alex, and the Venuum design team. Neither Matt nor Alex had ever seen the actual physical panels in person before this moment. They had only looked at digital images and discussed design ideas from a distance, placing an enormous amount of trust in Venuum's ability to turn those digital concepts into real, physical parts that would actually fit correctly onto an incredibly rare and complicated car. When the kit finally made its journey from Dubai to Miami, it did not arrive using any typical shipping method. Instead of a truck or a standard courier service, the enormous crates containing the wide-body panels arrived by helicopter, landing directly in the backyard of Alex's property, while the Bugatti sat waiting patiently inside the workshop nearby. This dramatic method of delivery stood in sharp contrast to another part of the story happening at the very same time, where a completely different component, a fuel control module needed for a separate Bugatti Veyron project located in the United Kingdom, was still taking several weeks just to arrive from France, a much shorter distance to travel compared to the journey from Dubai to Miami. This contrast highlighted just how unusual and impressive it was that such an enormous, complicated body kit could travel across the world and arrive within only a matter of days, using a delivery method typically reserved for emergencies or extremely high-priority situations. When the crates were finally opened, revealing the real, physical wide-body panels for the very first time, what Matt and Alex discovered inside was even more impressive than anyone had expected based on the earlier digital renders. The design turned out to be far more aggressive and dramatic than anything Bugatti itself would ever consider approving for one of its official vehicles, featuring wider rear arches, extended side skirts, a completely redesigned front end, an oversized rear wing with proportions completely different from anything found on the factory version of the Purse Sport. Every single element of the design looked bigger, bolder, and wider than the original car, setting the stage for one of the most dramatic and risky transformations imaginable. It is worth thinking about just how much trust was involved at this stage of the project. Matt and Alex had committed enormous amounts of money and time to a kit they had never actually held or touched, based entirely on digital images and conversations with a design team located on the other side of the world. If the panels had arrived poorly made, badly fitted, or simply different from what had been promised, the entire project could have collapsed at this exact moment, wasting months of planning and an enormous financial investment. The fact that Venuum successfully delivered something that matched and arguably exceeded the expectations set by the earlier digital render speaks to the level of skill involved in designing a completely original body kit without any existing wide-body Chiron to reference or copy from. Every curve, every panel gap, and every proportion had to be imagined and engineered entirely from scratch, making this delivery moment one of the biggest turning points in the entire rebuild. With the wide-body panels finally in hand, the project reached its most nerve-wracking and irreversible stage, the moment when Matt had to physically cut into the original carbon fiber quarter panels of Bugatti in order to properly install the new, extended rear arch extensions included in the Venuum kit. This detail matters enormously, because these particular panels were not damaged or already broken pieces left over from the earlier crash. These were perfectly good, completely intact factory Bugatti panels, carefully manufactured and installed by Bugatti itself, representing exactly the kind of rare and valuable component that simply cannot be replaced if something goes wrong during the process. Because Bugatti refuses to sell replacement panels for this car, there was absolutely no safety net available if the cut turned out badly. There was no backup plan, no simple fix, and no way to quietly order another piece if a mistake happened. Once the cut was made, there would be no going back, no matter what the outcome turned out to be. Matt approached this critical moment with obvious caution and respect for just how serious the decision really was. He carefully measured and marked exactly where the cut needed to be made, taking time to make absolutely certain everything was correctly positioned before moving forward. He picked up the cutting tool, paused for a brief moment, clearly aware of the weight of what he was about to do, and then finally made the cut. As Matt himself admitted in that moment, once the cut was made, it was completely and permanently done, with absolutely no way to reverse the decision afterward. Alex, perhaps trying to ease some of the tension in the room, jokingly suggested that if the cut somehow went wrong, they could simply buy another quarter panel to replace it. But both men understood that this was not actually a realistic option, since replacement panels for this exact car simply do not exist anywhere in the world, whether through official Bugatti channels or anywhere else. Fortunately, After all the careful planning, measuring, and patience leading up to the single moment, Mat's cut turned out to be exactly right. The new rear arch extensions fit perfectly into place, exactly as intended, without any waste of material or mistakes. The extended side skirts were then carefully drilled and securely bolted onto the original side skirts, creating a strong and stable connection between the new components and the existing structure of the car.